Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for in the middle of a very crazy time, but for a topic and budget item that we all believe is really important. Clean water is a human right. So much so that we enshrined it into our state's constitution with the Green Amendment just 2 years ago, and the voters agreed and put that forward, and it is now part of our state constitution. And we now, as a state, have an obligation to make sure that we are providing everyone with clean, reliable water. And yet our municipalities are tasked with this, quite frankly, Herculean job, especially our smaller towns and cities across our state, because we have some of the oldest water infrastructure in the country. And the cost to maintain it, the cost to upgrade it is astronomical. And we are asking many of our towns to foot these bills or put that cost passed on to taxpayers where that tax base may just simply not be there. And so we have a strong coalition of who I will introduce in a moment supporting the Safe Water Action Program, or nicely known as SWAP, Safe Water Action Infrastructure Program. This item is supported by over 7,000 members from the New York Section American Water Works Association, New York Rural Water Association, and New York Water Environment Association. We also have municipal leaders here, and is supported by the New York State Conference of Mayors, New York State Association of Counties, and the New York State Association of Towns. And we have a robust environmental coalition. Standing here with us today is Riverkeeper and Scenic Hudson, who have been champions with us in making sure that not only people have clean water, but the infrastructure is reliable enough to maintain it. Just a couple props, because they're important to kind of show the scope of what we're dealing with here. This is a lead pipe that was pulled from the city of Kingston, and this tiny little break caused decimation within our city, something that is still widely used and that we are putting a lot of funding in to fix, but widely used across our state. And we also have, you may be wondering what this beautiful piece of equipment is here. And this is a wooden pipe pulled from the city of Troy that I have to disclaimer is they are no longer using wooden pipes, but this was pulled from the city and was actually really a fire hydrant. In a couple moments, I'll call up Chris to talk a little bit more about it, kind of the mechanisms of it. But I want to get in to hear from the leaders in this space and acknowledge some of those who are with us. So first up, I would like to introduce Rich Strout, who is the incoming chair of the New York Section American Water Works Association and the mayor of Voorheesville.
Mayor. All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Hinchey, for having us here. So I'm here representing the New York Rural Water Association, the American Water Works Association, New York Section, and New York Water Environment Association. I'm a member of all of them and a water professional, and as the senator said, a mayor. And in all those roles, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing to advocate for clean water and for the SWAP bill. It's so important, and as the senator said, we have some of the oldest infrastructure in the country here in New York State. You know, the people that we represent in these organizations are the thousands of people whose responsibility it is to design, build, maintain, and operate this safe water infrastructure. The biggest challenge is funding, the basic funding. And as the senator said, you know, water is a basic right. It's a basic need. We all know that. It's a basic right in a civil society like we have. And with that basic right, we need basic funding to maintain this infrastructure. And that's exactly what the SWAP bill does. It provides, like the CHIPS funding for highways, it provides a basic level of funding so that we can maintain that infrastructure. And as we think about that, I mean, where are we today with this old infrastructure? The American Society of Civil Engineers tells us that we need about $44 billion worth of investment in our drinking water infrastructure over the next 20 years. And but for funding, we have a C minus grade on the condition of that infrastructure today. And on the wastewater infrastructure, we have a D plus grade, but for funding, and another 40 billion plus or minus worth of infrastructure needs to maintain that infrastructure. So thank you, Senator Hinchey. I mean, it's so important that we have this basic funding to serve that basic need. We stand with you in this effort. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You know, access to clean water and making sure that money is available has been a priority of New York State for years, for decades, really. But what we see is that the clean water grant system, while really important, doesn't often get to some of our smaller municipalities or our towns. And it also doesn't allow our municipalities to plan for upgrades and maintenance and new lines in the way that they need to. And so a CHIPS-like model for water infrastructure would be a game changer in being able to not only get people clean water access, but also plan your budgets, plan the work, be able to hire the people you need, maintain steady stream of employment. All of these things are really important, and this bill will be able to get us there. I want to thank all of my colleagues, especially in the Senate, who put this in our One House bill. But first, we are going to hear from a champion of ours in the Assembly who carries this bill with us and is fighting with it, Assemblymember Aileen Gunther.
Well, I'll be quick, but you know, I live right by many beautiful, the Rio River, the Delaware River, and you know, when we think about water and you know, access to clean water, you know, clean water is the essence of life. We need clean water, and it's about time that New York State and Kathy Hochul make sure that before we give out capital money for anything else, we have to make sure that the federal government and the state government support clean water in our communities. It's a basic right, and I thank Senator Hinchey for what she does. She's amazing. I knew her dad, and she follows a long line of environmentalists. So we're here today to ask for this to be done, and done now and this year. Thank you.
That's right. This type of funding and these ideas have been around for a while. It's time we take action, and in this budget right now is the time to do it. I'd like to now call up Senator Rachel May, the chair of the Rural Resources Commission and our senator from Syracuse.
Thank you, Michelle. And thanks everyone for being here. This is so important and just a brilliant way to handle this problem, because I work with small towns and villages in Cayuga County that I now represent. Sometimes it takes years for them to get the funding for a new, just a line to their wastewater treatment facility, or to extend a filtration project or something like that. And making this more like a CHIPS plan where they can have access to the funding in a much more timely fashion is just brilliant. So thank you for doing this. I also want to say our water resources in the Finger Lakes, hundreds of thousands of people get their drinking water from the Finger Lakes, and there are so many threats to these waterways, and being able to deal with faulty septic systems and really upgrade those wastewater treatment systems and improve filtration and that kind of thing is absolutely critical to human health and quality of life in that whole region. And just one more thing is, New York State, upstate New York, is going to be a magnet for people from all over the country and frankly all over the world as water is drying up elsewhere. And if we don't get out in front of this and make sure we've got robust water infrastructure, we are going to fail to be able to absorb that increased interest in our region over time. So I couldn't be more grateful for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Ryan Gregoire, the Legislative Director for New York Association of Counties.
Thank you, Senator, and good morning, everyone. You know, I just want to highlight everything that's already been said. And, you know, the Association of Counties, we represent all 62 counties, including the city of New York. This is a top priority piece of legislation. We're so happy to have Senator Hinchey championing this in the Senate. We've got to get this done in this year's budget. You know, Comptroller DiNapoli just issued a report a few years ago, and it's grown since then, that estimated we would need to spend $80 million a year just to maintain what we have. That's not to grow. That's not to provide opportunity for new businesses, new residents to come to our great state. That's just to keep the status quo in place. Our counties, our cities, our towns, our villages, we need this funding, and we need it in a model that makes sense, that is readily available, so we can plan for our capital projects going forward. This is the exact program that we need. And again, we need this done in this year's budget, and the Association of Counties is so happy to stand by your side and support this. Thank you.
And just to reiterate, what we are asking for is $100 million for CHIPS-like funding for this program to go to clean water infrastructure. Next, I would like to call up Senator Kevin Thomas.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Thomas from Long Island, and I'm here with my colleagues for one reason. Infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. Look at this. That's a fire hydrant. And we just stopped using that just a couple of years ago. All right? We need funding. All right? Just like Senator Hinchey said, it's just a drop in the bucket, this $100 million, but it needs to be done. It needs to be done because we are an advanced society. Clean water is a right. We need to get this right for the next generation. I have a 4.5-year-old, and I don't want her to be living in a society where we're still concerned about whether the water that comes out of the tap is dirty. And I want to thank my colleagues in government on both sides of the aisle for standing with us today. And thank you to Senator Hinchey for her leadership on this. And I urge the governor to do more, to make sure she understands that we need this money, especially when she's pushing forward with this housing compact. In building going forward, we need infrastructure first to build this the way she wants. So thank you once again to my colleagues in government, and let's get this done.
Next, I'd like to introduce Jeremy Turson, Senior Manager of Government Affairs for Riverkeeper.
Thank you so much. Hello, my name is Jeremy Turson. I represent Riverkeeper. We're an environmental organization that protects the Hudson River from New York City all the way up the Mohawk River. As many have said before me, clean water is now a right in the New York Constitution. But how do we get to a place where the rights of New Yorkers are finally realized? The Clean Water Act says that there should be no more discharges of sewage to waterways by 1980. We are long past 1980, and there are still tons of sewer discharges across the state. In New York City alone, each year, 72 Empire State Buildings full of sewage runs into the waterways around New York every year. You know, we need this SWAP program because it brings us closer to fulfilling that promise of clean water and the rights that have been afforded to New Yorkers through the constitutional amendment. And I know that Hudson River communities specifically need $2.2 billion to repair and upgrade wastewater infrastructure, according to our analysis of New York State's 2023 list of eligible projects. The average Hudson Valley sewer line is over a half-century old, and the American Society of Civil Engineers highlighted some positive trends in New York that would be supercharged by the SWAP program that Senator Hinchey is championing. First, we need asset management planning, which is becoming increasingly prevalent. And we need more community planning that would be supported by the SWAP program to help get ahead of problems that are expensive to fix when accidents happen. And that's what this is all about. We know that the Hudson River watershed contains about 1/3 of the state's wastewater treatment facilities, yet it accounts for nearly 40% of the needs across the state. And a program like SWAP is going to help communities across the Hudson Valley address those needs. This will be a great program. $100 million is an incredible investment. And I urge Governor Hochul and Speaker Hasty to ensure that it gets in the budget. And I'm so grateful that the Senate put it in the one house, and grateful for Senator Hinchey's support of this program. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Senator Leah Webb.
Good morning, everyone. I know we're all very warm, but it's important because, I'll just lift up, not only am I appreciative of Senator Hinchey's leadership on this issue, and we all agree that water is a human right, and I always like to go a step further and say water access is a necessity. I come from a region, I represent the southern tier of New York, and we have major rivers, the Shenango River, Susquehanna River, other water bodies like Cayuga Lake that provide water access. And as a former municipal elected, I understand that when budget time comes and leaders are looking at, well, how do we upgrade our infrastructure in small communities and rural communities and historically underserved communities, the price tag is too high. And so just for folks to even do a mile's worth of road infrastructure with water, separating water and sewer lines easily costs millions of dollars. And then the question becomes, who foots that tab? And for years, it's been disproportionately placed on the backs of those who can't afford to pay for those expenses. And so what I appreciate about this bill is that it puts into place a funding model that is sustainable, that takes into account the burden that happens with these important upgrades that have to happen. And we don't have to look far to understand that when we don't make these investments, what can happen in communities. We don't have to look that far. We can look at Flint, Michigan, and other communities that still to this day don't have access to clean water and are still fighting for this resource. Us here in New York have an opportunity to not only address this issue, but take the lead and show how we can invest in our infrastructure. And that's why I'm appreciative of Senator Hinchey's leadership. I also appreciate my colleagues in the Assembly and the Senate that support this, and everyone that's gathered here. Let's continue to push forward and get it past the finish line in the budget. And as I often remark, this budget is for me, it shows as a blueprint of what can happen when we recognize as leaders the importance of rectifying years of underinvestment in our communities. We can do the right thing for our residents and for this entire state. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. And that's right. So much of our infrastructure is like 200 years old, some built with wood, some built with lead, corroding. We've got communities that have breaks and they can't actually even pay to fix it. That's unacceptable from a state perspective. Chris, do you want to do just a quick overview of this pipe? Come on up. All points.
Okay. All right. The pipe was first installed in the city of Troy in the 1870s. We excavated it in the 1970s. It was no longer in service. It was just abandoned in place, and we found it. It's an interesting piece because it's a T-section. So they leaked like a sieve until the wood would swell and they would seal themselves. They were only buried a foot or two underground. They were very shallow because they were hand dug at the time. And when there was a fire, they would send the horse and carriage to the place of the fire. They would dig it up. They would put a hole in the main. The hole would fill up with water. They would use the bucket brigade to put the fire out, and then they would put the fire plug in there to seal it up. So the other interesting piece is if you ever heard a fire hydrant called the fire plug, that's the original fire hydrant right there.
Some New York State history here, and also some, quite frankly, really incredible engineering that for 1870, but we've moved past this now. And so we need to make sure that our municipalities have the funding to get people clean water, to plan their projects, and that's what the SWAP bill does. So, did I miss anyone? Does anyone want to say anything? Great. Well, thank you all. I want to say thank you to our incredible coalition, those who are standing here with us today, and others for really fighting for this important issue. And thank you all. We're going to get it done in the budget. The Senate is leading. Thank you, Eileen Gunther, and we'll make sure that the Assembly and the governor get this across the finish line. Thank you very much.